that's what I tell them. It doesn't end,
Yep.
well, that's only just the beginning. It's just what I say, a good head start to your career, and hopefully you're able to save a few nickels as you embark on something else you want to do.
Yeah, you just underscored it. Save your money while you're making it, Gino. Unbelievable.
Exactly.
Congratulations. Welcome to town. Have a good evening and a safe trip home, and thanks for being with us on the Marc Bernier Show.
This is News Talk 1150 WNDB Daytona Beach.
WNDB News Talk 1150. Marc Bernier. News Talk 1150. WNDB.
Good afternoon and welcome from Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, the President's Speaker Series. On behalf of President John Johnson, welcome to the Gail Lemeron Auditorium at the Captain Willie Miller Building on the campus of Embry-Riddle for our 49th Town Hall and our 8th in the series this year. With us, Lis Wiehl. She is a Fox News legal analyst, an instructor of law, a radio personality in her own right, and the author of the new book, Hand of Fate. On behalf of all of us at Embry-Riddle, let's give a warm welcome to Lis Wiehl.
It's great to be here. We're actually doing a radio show.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. With a live audience.
Yeah.
This is pretty exciting.
That's the way it works.
Wow.
Thanks for coming
Your students
down.
must love you.
We invited Lisa's husband, Mickey Sherman, who is a CBS News analyst, but he's involved in a murder trial right now.
He's in a murder trial right now. He's picking a jury, so couldn't quite make it down here.
Have you guys ever done an event together? We talked about the books and things that you've done.
Yeah, we have. We've done smaller events. Nothing as big as this or as prestigious as this. But we've done some smaller events. Yes.
This event will also be broadcast in a future Bookmark broadcast, and we want to thank our partners at Kenny TV on the internet at www.kennytv.com, where people can watch this live. We're going to talk a little bit about the book, talk about some current events. We're going to allow questions from our audience. Linnell Craig, who is with me tonight, and she'll be miking the audience. And we also have students from Atlantic High School.
Wait,
they're here
where are they?
in the
Where
way back
way
in the
back.
audience.
Oh,
They've
hi
raised their
there.
hand, and they're
that's
with
great.
us.
Lights on them. Good.
And they'll be asking questions as well. This program will run approximately 90 minutes, including the book signing. First, let's talk about the book, Hand of Fate. Lis Wiehl, I didn't know until the first book that you wrote that you were a novelist as well. And this book has special meaning for me.
Now, why would that be?
Because the talk show host dies.
A radio talk show host.
Yeah. He dies, and in the studio he died in, I worked in a studio just like that, airtight. And you co-wrote this book with April Henry. Mm-hmm. How did you get linked up with April Henry?
I knew what I wanted to write about, and April's out in Portland, so that was terrific because she's there. She can get the scene of Portland more than I can. I'm from Washington State, but Portland's not my home, it's hers. And I wanted to set something out, not in Washington State and not in New York, where I live now, but in Oregon. And she's great with that. She's also not a lawyer, so if I write things that she says, well, what does that mean? I don't get that. Then I'm thinking, okay, roll it back, explain to people what that means, which is terrific.
This was, I know this book was written partly because of your experiences in radio and as a prosecutor.
Right.
But as I saw in an internet interview, you also felt that you could relate to one of the other characters as well, two of the people.
Well, the three characters. Allison is a federal prosecutor, and I was a federal prosecutor, and a lot of the characters and incidents in the book are, let's just say I changed the names to protect the guilty. You know, and it's fiction. Yes, fiction. So, you know, I totally relate with Allison. I'm a third-generation federal prosecutor. The other character, Nicole, is an FBI agent. My father was an FBI agent, so I grew up with a dad who was in the FBI. I worked with female FBI agents when I was a prosecutor. And then Cassidy, of course, is a TV reporter, which is what I do now. So I blend, I guess, all the jobs I couldn't keep, I mean, I don't know, into these three women, and it's so much fun and so liberating to write fiction where you don't have to footnote your navel. I mean, you can actually talk about things and have fun with it and write about things that I think matter to people. And as you say, I did 7 long years with Bill O'Reilly as his co-host on radio. And I now do TV with him every Tuesday if you watch Is It Legal? Can't shake him, I guess, but whatever. Anyway, for 7 years I was his co-host on radio, and I realized after he gave that up in March of, I guess, a year and a half ago, that I either needed deep psychological help, or I should write a book about, offing a radio talk show host. And he helped me write the opening. It was great. He said, well, no, don't kill me this way, kill me that way. He had the whole thing worked out. We had a lot of fun with it.
It was 9 years ago that Bill O'Reilly was right in this very spot doing a town hall here at Embry-Riddle to talk about his book, and it was before he began the radio thing. And I remember him saying to me, you're on the air, at that time I was on 4 hours a day. He said, you're on 4 hours a day, 5 days a week. Who can do that?
He did it. He did it for
Yeah.
7 years. He was on 2 hours with me on radio, and then the O'Reilly show on TV, three hours a day.
So it's a lot.
It's a lot.
You have children. Tell us
Two
about
kids.
those.
I just got off the phone with one of them. I'd have to turn it off to talk to you all because she needs her soccer badge sewn on for her game this weekend. I've got a 17-year-old boy. He's a senior in high school. And for all you parents out there, or you guys in high school, oh my gosh. I mean, junior and senior year, stressful. For the kid, yes, but for the parents, even more. So he's going through that. He's a great student. He's a baseball guy. He plays the drums. I mean, I just, knock on wood, he's doing great. My daughter, 13, I've got 2 teenagers at home. My daughter, 13, soccer player, smart, and she wants to catch up with her brother and make sure that she does better than he does. So that's great. So I can kind of play one off the other. I hope they're not listening to any of this. And I'm a big believer, and you guys up there do not listen to this, clap your ears, in eavesdropping. I mean, I think as a parent, you should read your children's diaries. Agreed? Right? Yes?
Not a privacy issue here?
Okay, I'll give you privacy all day long in cases, but when it comes to my kids, I read their diaries. I want to know. And I have friends. I can't friend my own kids because it's complicated with my friend, all of that stuff. But I have spies that go into there, and they friend them, and they tell me what's going on in Facebook. So that's how I know.
All right. And Mickey, being a lawyer himself, there must be a lot of interesting stuff that happens. I mean, you both worked on big cases, and he's prosecuted and been involved in some big cases.
Michael Skakel case, the Alex Kelly case, a lot of big cases, right?
Was he like on the other side of the Mark Furman part of the Skakel case, or am I mistaken?
Different. I mean, he was the defense for Michael Skakel, and then Furman came later with the book about the whole Skakel trial. So they weren't really together or apart in the actual trial itself.
Now, I know that when we first heard of you, you were in Washington. I think you were still teaching.
I was a professor
Washington.
in the University of Washington Law School, yes.
And then Fox News saw you and...
I had represented the Democrats during the impeachment of President Clinton, and I had done newspaper for the New York Times before that, and then NPR, All Things Considered, doing commentaries for them. And then I represented the Democrats during the impeachment, and MSNBC and Fox and all of them kind of came knocking after that. And I thought with Fox that I could make a difference. And then, of course, when Bill started with the radio, it just made more sense for me and the kids to move to New York, which we did.
We're going to get some substantive stuff here, but I got to ask. You go on and Google Lis Wiehl.
Uh-oh.
There is a thing that comes up.
Don't believe anything. It's the evil twin.
Yeah.
It's not me.
Say, O'Reilly shuts Lis Wiehl microphone off.
Yeah.
What, did he tell you what, to shut up and just shut the mic off on you, or is that
He
just...
did that a couple of times in our early years, yeah. He would get mad at me and shut the mic off until I told him, can I relate one story for you? It was we had just gone into radio, it was like 2 years in, I guess, and there was a little girl who went to a doctor, I believe it was at Duke Hospital, and they bungled the case completely. Jessica, I think was her name. They completely bungled the case, they being the doctors. And we talked about it on radio the day after, and Bill said, well, her parents were here illegally, and so she really doesn't have any rights, the parents can't sue. And I said, well, wait a second, I mean, just because she's here illegally and the parents are, I guess, here illegally, that doesn't give the doctors a right to bungle her case. Once they take her on, then they've got to treat her properly. And we kind of went back and forth, and he screamed so much he turned off my mic. So the next day, the callers had been calling in after my mic was turned off in the beginning of the next show, and he said on air, he said, well, the callers have called in and we're about 50-50 on who sides with you, Lis, and who sides with me. And I said, well, gee, imagine, we're 50-50. Imagine if you hadn't turned my mic off, where we might be. And that kind of was the end of the mic shutting off. Because I said to him, if you turn my mic off, then I've won the argument.
Yeah, sometimes I know that I've watched you guys, and I've said, let her talk, and that's the tough thing when you're in television. When do you jump in? You don't want to hog airtime.
Yeah,
all
you
that.
don't want to do that. And
it's not your show. It's his.
It's not my show. It's his show. It's not the Wiehl factor. So, the other thing is, I think about everybody at home watching or listening. I don't know about you all, but I don't want people screaming at me when I'm at home. I'm cooking dinner. I'm watching the television or turning on to the radio. I want to be informed. Yes, I want to be entertained. But when people scream over each other and all of that, I put the mute button on. I don't want that invading my home.
How many people feel like that in the audience? Look at that.
Right?
Sea of hands.
It's sort of beneath me. I don't want to do that. So when it's appropriate, I'll respond. And if I get upset sometimes, which I do, it's honest. I don't fake it.
The major theme in this book, Hand of Fate, is where Jim Fate, who is the talk show host, the radio talk show host, kind of a loudmouth guy, heavily opinionated, gee, that never happens, is killed. And he's killed with sarin gas, I believe. And I was wondering, there was a very famous book that was written, I think you may even make allusion to a talk radio.
Right.
Eric Bogosian played him in the movie. I interviewed Eric Bogosian at the Miami Book Fair, and it was one of the hardest roles he ever played. They made it into a play. How much of that possibly influenced you to take that tack, or did it at all?
A little bit. It was kind of an afterthought. Really, I just wanted to do the whole thing of the murder of the talk show radio host, because I thought I can get behind the scenes. I can tell people what it's really like to be in a major radio studio, and what the callers are like, and what the screeners are like, and bring all of those worlds together. And then the Berg case, what you're referring to, when I was doing the research for the book, that was like, oh, of course, I got to bring that in and make that the package that Jim Fate opens, because that's kind of a double. If you know your history, it's kind of a wink or nod to that. But no, it wasn't like a driving force. It was just kind of a fun piece to throw in. And then I've got a lot of other talk show radio hosts that are in here.
Yeah.
Little things that refer back to them. So people love to think that it's all about them.
Alan Berg, who died he was shot to death
shot
in his driveway.
Yeah, it was really horrible. Bill is fine. He really is. It's fiction, okay?
There's a talk show host in Portland, colleague of ours, and he's friends with you, Lars Larson.
Lars Larson.
Did he contribute to this? Because KEX is mentioned in this book.
Yes, Lars Larson is a dear friend. Lars, I hope you're hearing this. He's a very good friend, and yes, he sent me a bunch of Second Amendment hats, and we've got a couple of references to Lars here and a couple of other talk show radio hosts. So it's a little bit kind of, having fun with it.
I'm not going to give this away, but when you find out who committed the murder, you never would have guessed it. I did.
That's the point. Did you guess it?
No, absolutely.
Good. Well, that's kind of the fun of it. I mean,
I thought it was the guy.
I grew up with Encyclopedia Brown.
No, there's many guys in this book. The guy. There's
Nancy
a guy.
Drew, all of these. I mean, I always love to think, I'm dating myself, Encyclopedia Brown and Nancy Drew and the Hardy Boys, but I love to look ahead and see, who is it? Who could it? And then when I never did figure it out, I would go back to sort of go through the book and say, oh, like Miss Marple, I would have seen that. I mean, in other words, I don't like a book, mystery especially, where they cheat you. In other words, you could never have figured it out and there were never any clues. I think in Hand of Fate and the other books in the Triple Threat series I hope you don't figure it out, but when you get to the end of the book and you want to go back and see the clues that were there, they really are there. I mean, you're not cheated that way.
We have an audience that's made up of students as well from Atlantic High School and Embry-Riddle and the general public. We're going to start having you take your questions for Lis Wiehl coming up. I want to ask you about a debate that you were involved in about 2 years ago with a guy named Mark, I want to say
Rudolph? Oh, okay.
You were on television debating with him about, this is an interesting case. This is a woman who gets engaged to a guy, moves in with him, and then they break up. And I think she sued him for a lot of money.
Oh, that's right.
For broken
she
engagement.
Moved, right. And
You said she was entitled to the money.
Well, The only state in the union, I think, that allows the woman to keep the engagement ring if an engagement is terminated is Montana, because the idea being that an engagement ring is sort of part of a contract. I mean, I hate to get so clinical about it, and the contract is partly that I give you this ring, and for this ring, you'll marry me. And so if the marriage doesn't happen, then the engagement ring has to come back. But as I remember, and this was a couple of years ago, in that case, this woman wasn't just suing about the engagement ring. It was that she moved from a job that she had to another state and gave up that job and couldn't find another job, and then the guy dumped her. And so then she wanted to sue. It's a stretch.
It was millions of dollars, as I recall.
That she wanted. This is America. You can ask for millions of dollars and get 25 cents and still claim you won.
Interesting debates that happened, and it's a great feature. I was watching the other night. Now, we have, for our radio audience here and those listening on the internet as well, a pretty prominent attorney general who has launched this lawsuit against Obamacare. And I know that you've opined on this subject, whether or not the citizens in this country should be forced to undergo any type of health care insurance.
Right.
Where do you think that's going to go?
Well, to the Supreme Court. I mean, it started here in Florida. It's 20 states have joined into this action, but it's spearheaded here in Florida. And it's here with a federal court judge who's a kind of a maverick. He's an interesting judge. He had 2 bear heads in his office that he was forced to take down, but he was like, I want to scare everyone who comes into my chambers. I kind of like the judge. A Reagan appointee. He's been on both sides of many different issues. Whatever he decides, it will go to an appellate court, and whatever happens at the appellate court, it will go to the Supreme Court. So it is not ending here anytime soon. That being said, it's an incredibly complex issue, because what the government, the federal government, can say is that we can levy a tax. Now, rewind a little bit. When health care was passed, the Obama administration said this is not a tax. But now they have turned around 180 degrees and are saying the IRS will take this quote-unquote penalty. Okay, IRS, what do they do? I think they kind of are in charge of taxes. So they're rewinding that and saying, well, yeah, it's a tax or it's a penalty. The IRS is in charge of this. And the reason that they're doing that is because they can fall back on the general welfare clause in the Constitution, which says that Congress can levy taxes in the general welfare of the country. So what the states, including Florida, would have to show in order to get around that is that this health care bill is not in the, quote, general welfare. How do they do that? I mean, that's a really tough burden to meet.
Can they get, and forgive me because this is not my area, a stay, or can it be stopped? An injunction that stops the clock from running while this thing works its way through the court system?
Yes. Again, though, the problem is that most of the taxes or penalties or whatever we want to call them that we're talking about don't take effect until 2014. So another argument that can be made is that the states don't have what's called standing, that the issue isn't, quote, ripe, which means no one has been hurt by it yet. The argument against, see, I'm a lawyer, I can talk out of both sides of my mouth. The argument against that by the states is, well, wait a second, people already have been hurt by it, because even though the law hasn't taken effect, insurance companies are looking at the Obama healthcare law and raising our rates based on that. So yes, people have been hurt. So the court's got to weigh that. I mean, there's no one person, Joe or Josephine, coming in there and saying, I've been hurt yet. And that's a problem. That's a standing problem.
For the benefit of our radio audience, we're talking with Lis Wiehl. She's the author of the book Hand of Fate. She is a New York Times best-selling author. That must be a thrill to be able to say now you are, because your first book, is this a trilogy?
This is the second book. We're actually doing a bunch more books. So Heart of Ice is coming out in April. The scariest villainess ever, I'm telling you.
Some of the same major characters?
Same characters. Love these. It's so funny when you start writing, you kind of invent these people, and they're sort of, invented people, I guess. And now I just kind of ride around Allison, Cassidy, Nicole. You know, they're all we just take them with me. And I think, would she do that? Would she do that? Would Allison do that? What would Nicole say to that? What would Cassidy do? It's a little, I mean, again, it's a little frightening. But these women are sort of part of who I am now.
We've had another issue here that's also going around the rest of the country, and that is these red lights, these lights on traffic things that take pictures with the cameras of people who run red lights or are speeding. Are they constitutionally sound? Because this is in question.
Well, the Ninth Circuit just a couple of weeks ago found that, and this is scary, just to make an analogy to that a GPS system, you all know what a GPS system is. I love my GPS system. Thank you for it when I'm putting it on. But that the Ninth Circuit, a court of appeals, held that that the cops could actually put a GPS system underneath the hood of a car in someone's driveway. They suspected him of being a marijuana grower, and in a way to follow him. And the idea was there's no expectation of privacy because you have no expectation of privacy in your driveway. Now, I get that for being on a public street. That's an issue. What is your expectation of privacy? Not great. I get that for when you take your garbage out. You expect the garbage people to come and get it, so you abandon it. The cops can rifle through that. But when they're going so far as to put a GPS system on someone's car in their driveway, and meanwhile, what they said was, well, if you were rich and you were able to gate off your community and put a fence around it, then there'd be more of an expectation of privacy. I'm thinking, hello? What? So if I can't afford a gate, I don't have any expectation of privacy in my driveway?
Try this one on for size. In Virginia, an elected official was having an affair with a woman. He was married. He was having an affair. His wife put a GPS system on his car. Unbeknownst to him, there was a GPS system.
Were they living in the same house?
Yep. Married couple.
Right.
The wife puts a GPS system
Right.
on the husband's car because she suspects he's fooling around and, in fact, catches him. You know, now the
I don't think his major problem there, though, is his invasion of privacy. I think he's got bigger problems than
Believe
that.
it or not, I was told that his lawyer tried to argue, well, you know, my guy didn't know there was a GPS on his car and all of that. Can you believe this?
I'd love to be on that jury.
Yeah, I mean, can you imagine this? It's craziness. Illegal immigration also shows up a lot, and it's discussed with you and Bill on the O'Reilly factor. Why is it, and I know there are people in the audience, and this question's probably going to come up from one of our students, why is it that people who are here illegally, who broke the law, entitled to any rights?
I agree. I mean, that's the way it's written now, that if you're born here, or if you come here, once you're here, you have civil and criminal rights.
Even if you came in illegally, you snuck across the border.
Illegally, yes. Will that change? I don't know. I mean, I would tell you, I prosecuted illegal reentries after deportation as a federal prosecutor. These were the worst of the worst. These were guys and gals who had come into the country and illegally, and then committed crimes of quote-unquote moral turpitude, like rape, like murder. I mean, moral turpitude, okay? You know, not just cashing a bad check. And it was like the frequent flyer program. Put them in, prosecute them, and I was only a prosecutor for 5 years. I would still see the same people coming back, but I have to tell you, the people that I wanted on those juries, in those reentry after deportation cases, were immigrants that came here and did it legally, because they were so angry that these other people had come in illegally to begin with and then committed crimes. I mean, my mother was a Danish citizen. I'm the first generation. We all are. This is a melting pot. And I want people like my mom, like other people who came into this country from another country, did everything right. They are mad when they get those cases.
As somebody who waits...
Mad meaning angry, not like crazy.
7 years to go through the system to become
exactly.
And then somebody cuts the line and they get the same rights and
benefits. And then they commit crimes. I mean, not that all illegal aliens commit crimes. That's not what I'm saying at all. But those were the ones that I got, that I prosecuted.
All right, we're going to open up for phone calls too as well at 239-0033, AT&T star 1150, and toll free at 1-800-927-0033 if you want to give us a call between now and a quarter of the hour. And then for our radio audience, they'll be going to high school football tonight. when it comes to the arrest procedure, if you get somebody who crosses the border illegally, and we talked to federal agents that said there was one family, they arrested them 5 times in one night. I don't even know how that's possible. They gather them up, they process.
Let them go.
Yeah, and they let them go and they come back.
You
like
know,
boomerangs.
I mean, you have to understand the motivation, and Bill's talked about this too, that he and I agree on this one, that if you are somebody who is not making a living in your country and you want desperately to support your family, you'll do anything that you can. I mean, I don't blame the people that are trying to get here whatever way they can just to try to make a living. But there are so many people that are profiting off of these poor people. I mean, the mules, the people that, I mean, I prosecuted human smuggling cases, and the things that these smugglers do, I can't talk about on air. I couldn't even talk to you, at dinner about, because it would just disgust you. Is those are the real villains, not the people who are just really just doing anything they can to make a living.
These people who live in Texas feel like victims. There are people coming across the border, committing crimes, killing people,
Right.
stealing, going back. I mean, it's a war zone there, and this
Right.
gets into the political side, but is it not appropriate now to put troops at the border just to protect our own people?
Well, that's, of course, what's going on now with the discussion about what to do with immigration, and Arizona is the biggest example. I mean, the Arizona state has really tried to say, look, you feds, you're not doing what you're supposed to do. Yes, we understand that this is a federal jurisdiction and you're supposed to uphold the law, but you haven't been doing it, Arizona feds, and that's why the Arizona law came to pass. But as you know, most of that law has been gutted at this point due to the Supremacy Clause. The Supremacy Clause saying, the feds have ultimate control over immigration. The problem I have is I get that, and yet if the federal government isn't enforcing its own laws, then what is a state supposed to do? Right?
Yeah. I think most people in this room, show of hands, how many people think Arizona took the right steps to protect their own sovereignty? See, you get that all around the country.
Yeah. I mean, here's what I thought about the law when it was first initiated was, if there is racial profiling, we'll find out about it. And then there would be a case. I mean, if someone can prove that, hey, I was only pulled over because I looked a certain way, then that's an issue. I got it. But on the face of it, just reading the law, it distinctly said no racial profiling. The cops have to be having a legitimate conversation with somebody because they ran a red light or they did something else that you or I mean, when I got on the plane to come down here, I got to show my driver's license. To get through security, I've got to show this and that and the other. We all do. We all carry our identification. Do I think that's intrusive? Marginally, but I'm happy to do it because I want to be safe. Well, so then why? What's the difference? If I'm being pulled over because I've run a red light, which I would never do, then I'm going to show my driver's license. I'm going to show some kind of identification. That's really all the law required.
We're talking with Lis Wiehl, who is also the sister of actor Christopher Wiehl.
Yes,
which,
baby brother who's much taller than I am.
How is he?
He's doing great. Yeah, he's an actor in Los Angeles. He always wanted to act, even when we were kids. And I'm so proud of him. He is really making a living as an actor in Los Angeles, which is tough in these days, especially.
You mentioned a few minutes ago, and I know the audience picked up on it too, that you were involved, I guess, during the Clinton impeachment trial. As a prosecutor, as a professor of law, when you looked at the charges, did you think to yourself, this is thin? Or did you figure it was a good case and Republicans just blew it?
It was thin, and here's what I worried about. And I one of the reasons I chose me is because I didn't have any political fingerprints, either Democratic or Republican. I was just a former federal prosecutor, a woman. I think they wanted a woman to cross-examine Monica Lewinsky. They thought that would look better. I was so far away from the Beltway. I was from a small town in Washington State. So all of those things kind of came to play. But I really felt like to impeach the president on those charges would really lower the bar for impeachment. I mean, now, how many times did we hear in the Bush administration, impeach him, impeach him? And I kept thinking to myself, it's going to be like that for every president now. We've lowered the bar so far that it's not a high crime or misdemeanor. That's what the Constitution said. It has to be a high crime or misdemeanor. It can be any action, really, that the other side isn't happy with, and they can throw out the word impeachment, and it just stalls everything. The only precedent that we had to look at was Richard Nixon and then Andrew Jackson before him.
Did you think that he would be convicted? Or you?
No. No, I was there when he was actually impeached, and on the floor when he was impeached. But I knew at the trial that he would not be convicted. I mean, I didn't know, but I had a pretty good guess he wouldn't be convicted.
Did the prosecution appear to you, they knew that this was going nowhere, they were just going through the motions?
You know, Kenneth Starr had been doing an ongoing investigation of Clinton for many years on Whitewater, on Travelgate, on all of those other issues. And then Linda tripped into his world and was the best thing for that prosecution because it gave him then something to go forward on. And I remember when he testified in front of Congress, I mean, I was right there, he said there was nothing in Whitewater, there was nothing in Travelgate, but, you know, we've got Linda Tripp, and here are all these accusations. So for him, it was kind of a lifesaver. You know, it was a way to make a case. But again, I just felt like, yeah, did the president do things that were wrong? Absolutely. Should he have just come forward and tell the truth from the beginning? Of course. I mean, how many times, I'm sorry I'm segueing into this, but in your own life, certainly in what I've covered, is how many times is the cover-up so much worse than the crime? Martha Stewart, right? If she had just said, I screwed up, I took this tip, I shouldn't have taken this tip, and I'm so sorry, but she didn't. She never would have gone to jail. Not that she's doing fine. She's on Hallmark now. I mean, I see her the ads every 3 seconds. So she's doing fine. But so many times, whether it's in your personal life or these politicians that we see, John Edwards, I mean, so many, I can just recite them, that if they would just come forward, everyone makes mistakes. We're not perfect, we're not infallible, but just be honest about it. And they don't, and it makes it 100 times worse. I think that's what happened to President Clinton.
Lis, I've often suggested to my own radio audience that America is a forgiving lot.
Absolutely.
If you
Second chances. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they will forgive you, if you say you're sorry and you promise to move on, but it's the denial.
It's the denial.
That gets people.
Right. Well, again, I mean, I hate to be melancholy here, but right in your own life, I mean, how many times did a friend or somebody that you love or you care about lie to you and cover up versus if they just told you whatever the malfeasance that they engaged in, I did this, and I'm sorry if I hurt you, and can we move on? Is there any way I can make it up? I mean, I think most of us are accepting people. Not to say we wouldn't be hurt or not to say we wouldn't be angry, but it's that lying and that's that cover-up that really, really, I think, angers us more than anything else.
President Barack Obama, do you believe that he is a legal American citizen?
I think that the whole birth thing is tangential, and I think it takes away from the reality. He's in office. He is the president, okay? Let's move on. Let's get on to issues. Let's talk about our economy. Let's talk about things that really matter. The rest of it, that stuff, I leave it alone.
So it doesn't come into your thinking as to whether he was legitimate or not?
He's there. Let's deal with it. I think there's so many more important issues to deal with than where he was born. Really.
Well, I interviewed the governor of Hawaii, who was a Republican, a week before the election. She's campaigning for John McCain. I asked her right on the air, and I'm thinking, if anybody's going to put him away, it's going to be the governor of Hawaii, who's campaigning for McCain, who has every opportunity. And I said, is he, in your judgment, Governor, a legal citizen of this country born in Hawaii? And she said, yes. Once she did that, I walked away from the birther movement.
Yeah.
I said, if she's not going to throw him under the bus.
No. I think we're wasting our time. We have so many more serious issues to worry about and think about than that. And we've got healthcare, we've got the economy, we've got jobs, we've got, I mean, so many, we've got 2 wars going on. I mean, I know they say one is over, but it's not. We've got so many other things to worry about. It seems to me that when we get distracted on something like that, it takes away from the credibility of those who are talking about it.
But even having said that, just as a follow-up, it was alarming to or disappointing to a lot of Republicans who voted for President Bush that Democrats wouldn't let go of the fact that they said he was illegitimately elected president because the courts decided. So it's kind of like the same thing, is it not?
Okay, I see what you're saying. We're talking about the Bush v. Gore decision, and a lot of Democrats said, wait a second, I mean, it was handed to the Supreme Court, and I was there with Brian Williams at MSNBC when they were arguing this, and again, whatever I think personally about that, it doesn't matter. The man's in office. We have bigger issues to deal with than worrying about the legacy of the Supreme Court.
We're going to come. I want to come back to the book here for a moment and talk about the characters that you developed in here. People working at a radio station. You got prosecutors. You've got all kinds of people that could have killed this person. And I don't generally do well with fiction. Most of the authors that I interview yearly have all written non-fictional books. But because the storyline, it caught my attention, and I wondered, what are the prospects? And I know people who have been hurt by listeners and fans, and you never know. I mean, we actually had an edict once. My colleagues are listening. We weren't even supposed to taste food that came in.
You had someone taste it for you?
Yeah. Of course, there wasn't much left.
Let them go down.
And then we had this situation.
Sandwich is good.
You never know. I worked at a radio station in New Bedford, Massachusetts that had glass, that separated us from the outside. We have it at WNDB as well. And I remember that the guy was on before me. It was at a corner. It was at a little, what used to be a drugstore, made into a radio station, and traffic would stop right outside the window for a traffic signal.
And it wasn't bulletproof or anything?
Right. So here's Manny on the air, Manny Simmons, it was the host, and some guy just goes and shoots at him.
Oh, gosh.
Goes through the glass. Missed Manny, but there's a bullet hole like about that big. So I'm coming on the air next. It's 5 a.m., and I'm on the air. Here comes about 8 o'clock, like 3 hours of this. And the owner comes into the station. He goes, hey, heard Manny got shot at last night. I said, yeah. Hey, George, any chance we might think of getting bulletproof glass? He takes a look at the glass, takes a look at me, looks at the glass and goes, nah, it's cheaper to replace the announcers. And he walks out.
And you know what? He probably wasn't kidding either.
No, he wasn't. So, anyway. But the characters are people you know, aren't they? I mean, they're close to people you know. Did these people contact you and say, it's a little close to home?
Well, you have to read a couple of them. Let me see. Let's see. Alan Colmes, who is sort of the liberal, a talk show host with a long list of people who want him dead. Has Lis Wiehl been reading my email? Talk radio fans and mystery lovers alike won't rest easy until they discover who had the hand in the fate of fate. But then what I love, I've got to show you this in the back.
That's what the letters
from
host?
Letters from host. Okay, so Bill writes, Wiehl. We're on a last name basis after 12 years together. Wiehl, nice work on the book, but could you have tried a little harder to disguise me? I'll forgive you this time, Bill. And Lars Larson, we were talking about him in Oregon. Lis, your book series is fantastic. That Jim Fate sure seems like a great guy. West Coast digs and that great Second Amendment baseball cap on the wall of his office. He sent me a whole box of them. I'm really flattered that you'd base a character on me, even if he does end up dead. At least he beat the new Obama estate tax rules, right? I mean, they go on. Mark Levine. So Jim Fate is the great one, huh? That's very funny. Thanks for basing him on me. Best of luck with the series. We need to talk about this on my show so you can explain yourself.
Talk show hosts are such shy people.
It's so shy. Monica Crowley. I'll just read one more, then I'll be quiet about it. Hi, Lis. Monica Crowley. I was sitting in my radio studio today when the police arrived to question me about the death of Jim Fate. I cooperated fully and have an airtight alibi, of course, but none of us in the talk radio business is above suspicion. Sure, he was controversial, but he was also a true champion of the First Amendment. His killer wanted to silence him and the rest of us who believe in free speech. Thank goodness the Triple Threat Club is on the case. Monica Crowley. Host of the nationally syndicated The Monica Crowley Show on WABC. This is a fiction book, and all these real people are thinking that they actually were killed or giving alibis for not being killed.
Juris Doctor from Harvard.
Yes.
O'Reilly went to Harvard, didn't he?
He went to the Kennedy School, yes.
Okay, and John LeBoutelier, who's going to be here in 2 weeks, he too went to Harvard. So
it's a conspiracy. No, Bill said to me the other night on Tuesday night when we were doing our show, and he said something about, and Wiehl, he went to Harvard, and I said, is that a bad thing? He was like making it sound like it was a horrible thing that I went to Harvard, when he himself went.
I know that Linnell Craig is around here somewhere, and through the darkness here, Linnell, I'm going to give you this microphone, and we're going to start taking questions from the audience before Lis then signs copies of the book. So I will hand this to you. And if you want to ask Lis a question, we'll bring the house lights up in just a couple of minutes, and you can ask your questions of Lis, and Linnell will mic you, and then we'll go back and forth that way. I want to ask you about Guantanamo here, in case our audience doesn't ask. This is a troubling subject for many of us,
Right.
and maybe you can help us from the legal angle. The United States placed these prisoners in Guantanamo, basically so that they could keep a lid on them, and because if they had them in this country, they would have to then give them all of the rights and
Civilian
privileges.
rights,
Civilian
right,
rights.
right.
How does that work? How is Guantanamo an abnormality, or do we have other holding bins around the world that we could do this?
I don't know about that. I do know that Guantanamo is a huge snafu. I mean, the Obama administration said that they were going to close. Remember when actually one of the promises before he was elected was that it would be closed down. And of course it's still ongoing, and there are still issues about giving civilian versus military trials. The whole issue very recently about trials in New York for some of the, it just, which really just got all of New York very, very upset to think that the bombers could actually be in New York and being tried there with civilian rights. I don't think it's a political issue in the sense, I think any administration, whether Republican or Democrat, it would be dealing with this. I mean, the Bush administration dealt with it as best they could as well, and Obama has realized it's not just that simple to close this down. We don't want to just let these people go, and by the way, many of the people in their own countries will not take them back. So, where do we put them? And there are some governors who said, oh, bring them to me, for a certain amount of money. I think Virginia was one of them. It's I would love your all thought about what to do on that, because from a legal perspective, you're right. Once they're here in this country, then they're really afforded civilian rights, which means lawyers and full disclosure and full evidence and public information. And of course, I worry from a security standpoint, what does that mean? Are any of these guys going to, these lovely people going to be using those trials as a method or methodology of just getting their message out there, as we've seen in a couple of cases? And that's truly frightening.
Do you think that the trial of Sheikh Mohammed, should that be even happening in New York? Do you think it should be happening in New York?
I think New York is, and I've only been there for Fox for 8 years. I came from the West Coast, so I'm not, I went to college in New York as well, but it's different when you're a student. New Yorkers they're tough, and they're street smart, and they're safety conscious, and I think if anywhere in the country they could handle a trial like that, yes, they could handle it. But I also think about the victims of 9/11, and just having that monster there in the city. I guess I think of the victims first and how painful that would be for them.
And I have to follow up with the mosque.
Yeah.
Is there some legal option to move this thing out of there and be done with this?
Unfortunately, because of, not unfortunately, I love the First Amendment. We have the right to freedom of religion and right to free speech, and there's no legal reason to stop them. There's no permit that can't be accessed. There's no legal reason to keep them from building that mosque. You would just think from a morality standpoint that they would realize, how crazy that is to do. On the other hand, what's been said in the last couple days is, well, wait a second, if we now don't build the mosque after you push this in this corner, then that's going to be a message to the Muslim world that, oh, Americans, look how terrible they are, they won't let a mosque be built. But what I don't understand, I guess I'm just a simpleton, forget about the legal aspect of this. Manhattan's a big place. There are a lot of empty spaces. There's a lot of real estate. Why does it have to be right there? Why can't they build this wonderful mosque and peace-loving and all of that just a little bit not further? Just not right there.
If you were
seems to be an easy thing to do.
If you were a betting person, do you think that thing is actually ever going to be built?
I don't think so. Think about it this way, again, from a practical standpoint. What construction company is going to take that case or take that work, right? You get that call to do that mosque, you're an American construction company, you're going to, I don't think so.
For our radio audience listening on WNDB, we bid you a pleasant adieu. For everyone here and listening and watching on the internet, we're going to continue now with the open discussion questions from the audience. If you have a question for Lis Wiehl, and on this side too, Linnell Craig is going to do the best of like a game show hostess moving through the audience.
Donahue.
There you go. Your questions beginning for Lis Wiehl. Good evening and thank you for being here.
Hi. First of all, thank you, and really enjoy you and Kimberly Guilfoyle with Bill. Those are exciting episodes. Thanks.
We have a lot of fun. Thank you.
You can tell on the show. My concern and question is comparing what I would think is hypocrisy or double standard, comparing the Arizona law with sanctuary cities, and similar to what's happening up in Pennsylvania now. Has sanctuary cities been under any kind of constitutional test at all, and do you think it will be, and your opinion on that?
There have been some, especially in San Francisco, which is acknowledge the sanctuary city, and you all know what that means, which is that illegal aliens can be there, and the local government won't do anything about it, and they put that out there. I think the Arizona law went at least as far as it's, because there's still some teeth to it, although not the teeth that it was originally implemented. I think that will put some pressure on sanctuary cities, especially if they want federal funding. I think that's the key. It's the purse strings.
Let's go back in the audience once again. Here's Linnell. Good evening, sir.
Thank you very much. Do you think with the Department of Justice, Eric Holder, the Attorney General's challenge to SB 1070 Arizona, the, I guess, dropping the Black Panther voter intimidation case, and suing Sheriff Joe Arpaio and the like, do you think Eric Holder and the DOJ is becoming more and more politicized?
Well, just this week, the Holder administration and the Department of Justice did on the Black Panther case. This was a case in 2008 in Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, where 3 or 4 Black Panthers were outside of the polling area, and one of them at least had a nightstick and was very, very intimidating. I'm sure maybe some of you have seen the videos. The Department of Justice went after them, filed a lawsuit, won the lawsuit by default because they didn't even show up to counter the lawsuit, and then dropped the lawsuit and dropped all charges, again, except on the guy that actually had the nightstick. I think there was something still there. Right. But just this week, the department said, we are going to perform an investigation internally through the Office of Professional Responsibility, OPR. Not at that case in particular, but in the way that the Voting Act and the voting rights are being instituted and prosecuted. Are they racially fair? And that's going to be interesting, because I imagine that there's going to be somebody in the Office of OPR literally going through and looking at the charges that have been brought in the last 2 years on voting charges and counting how many were white, how many black, how many Asian, how many African American, how many Hispanic. It's kind of ugly, but I think that's where they're at right now.
Before we go back in the audience, and we also want to have our Atlantic High School students ready for their questions too. I know that this is an assignment for you as well. We had 2 town halls.
They're not here, they're on their own free will?
Are they, Miss Bone?
Do you get extra credit? Extra credit, okay,
yes, we like that.
Very good.
Catherine Cryer did 2 town halls with us here, the same thing with books, and I want to ask you the same question I asked her is, how valuable are jury consultants today in today's high power, or is it overrated?
I think I'm going to probably get shot by a jury consultant when I come. That'll be the next book. Wiehl, shot by jury consultant. I don't know. I think it's common sense. When you sit down and you look at a bunch of people and you're trying to pick a jury, and you've got to, in a very tight amount of time, decide who you want on your jury. And I've only been a prosecutor, so I only speak from that perspective, not from a defense lawyer's. I mean, if somebody walks in and, they're not properly dressed, or if they're looking around like this, or they're chewing their gum, or they're doing they're out. I mean, they have shown no respect for the court system. There's so many little tells that I think when I sat down with myself and my agent at the table and looked over the questionnaires and would talk to the jurors and just one-on-one ask them questions, I don't know. I think jury consultants, along with other folks, they make a cottage industry out of not much at all.
Let's go back in the audience. Your question now for Lis Wiehl. Good evening.
Lis, thank you. My name is Jason Seaton. I'm with the College Republicans here at the school. And when you address the issue of the birther movement and so forth, I find that I've held a lot of the same arguments and have a lot of the same points as you do. And your advice is to focus on the issues and so forth. In our group, one of the things that I like to bring up is focus on the things that you can do something about. What would you have us do in this situation? We have all the big issues and the number of them that you named off: healthcare, amnesty,
immigration, right.
All this stuff. They know what we think. They've heard the polls, they've heard the town halls, they know that 85% of Americans didn't want healthcare, 75% don't believe in any kind of amnesty. For years, the arguments come up and it's been shot down by the people, but the government says, no, we're going to do it anyway. What else do we have that we can do other than something like the birther issue?
What I think the birther issue takes away from, because what you've got to do to really win over hearts and minds, I think, is to go broader than whatever group you're with, right? I mean, to really make a difference, you have to vote people out or in, whichever. And to do that, you've got to get people on, not in the core, but on the fringe, the independents, people that are tuning in and tuning out and are not as focused as you are. And I think when people in that arena hear something about the birther movement, which is just, a lot of people tune out. It's like, we can't change that. So go after the big issues. Make your point about immigration. Choose the issues that you really care about, and just realize that, the legitimacy or illegitimacy, as we talked about with the Bush-Gore, move on. And one of the things that the Democrats are really getting pilloried by now is trying to blame Bush for everything. And they're getting that. I mean, they're getting hurt by that, by saying it was Bush this, Bush that. Well, move on. That was 2 years ago. Okay, you inherited some bad things. So did Clinton. So does everybody. And I think the stronger person, the stronger movement, it was one that says, bad stuff happened. Now what do we do to fix it?
In the audience now, Linnell, with some of the students from Atlantic High School.
My name's Kaylina. The past week we've been talking about gay marriage, and I was wondering, what's your standing point in it?
I believe, as my mother said to me so many times, there's not enough love in the world. And so whenever two people are together and that they love each other, that we have to embrace that. And not have to, we should embrace that. It's a great thing. I don't know that we need marriage, though, because the civil union gives anyone, straight, gay, whatever, two people that are together, all of the rights that gay marriage gives as well. Now, again, as I'm a lawyer, I can argue both sides. The gay marriage movement would say, well, but it's still a demerit on us. We still don't have the respect that we would have as a societal figure moving forward. I don't think it's really something that necessarily the state should be involved in at all, but we are as a country. And I mean, I think it's something between you and your God, and you and the vows that you take with your God. And I think the state should stay out of it, but that's not where we are. So maybe the intermediary is to say everyone should be able to have a civil union and have all of those rights that are accorded. Because, imagine if you're a gay couple, you've been together for 20 years, which is longer than most heterosexual marriages last, and you're with your loved one and he's dying or she's dying, and you have no way to sign off on any papers, you have nothing. I mean, that's not right. That's not right.
Following up on that, Florida is the only state that does not allow adoption by gays. All other states do. Is there likely to be some federal interaction that forces Florida to change that if the people of Florida don't want to change it?
I don't see that happening. I think that's a states' rights issue. I mean, that's, again, like marriage. I mean, there are certain things, health care, should be states' rights issues. I mean, you as a state get to decide what you want to do. Massachusetts decided years ago to allow gay marriage. Okay, fine for Massachusetts. Florida doesn't want to do that. Fine for Florida. I mean, you do have some rights as citizens of your state.
Let's go back in the audience now and questions for Lis Wiehl. Jimmy?
Good evening. My name is Jim Oddie, and I'm with the Republican Executive Committee of Volusia County. And I just think that, regardless of where the president was born, Christian, Muslim, or whatever, I just think that the people of America would like to feel that he's playing for the same team. And I think that's part of the problem, is that people don't really think that right now. Example, in the health care bill, it seems there's certain exemptions for Muslim and Amish people not to have to purchase that. So there's an equal protection issue.
A religious issue, right.
But also right now, I mean, we've seen in Italy that the government there has decided not to fund Islam as a religion. And in the Netherlands, where they've had a growing problem because of their tolerance, there's a man named Geert Wilders, who's the leader of the Freedom Party. And he's decided not to be tolerant of the intolerant. And they've actually started passing laws, or want to, with the Freedom Party in power. Do you see that happening here, where Islam will be declared more of a political ideology, which it really is, more of a lifestyle component,
versus a religious,
with a religious aspect kind of as a beard to kind of cover it up?
Right.
Do you see that happening here? Us kind of attacking that, because really it's more of an ideology, and not allowing the First Amendment, and not allowing them to take tax deductions in their mosque where they're actually preaching hatred and overthrow of the government.
Right. You're raising a couple different issues. One is a tax exemption, and let's get to that in a second. Let's go to your first issue. You cited Italy and the Netherlands as two examples, and my mother, as I said, is Danish, so I know the Netherlands, I know that whole part of the world. The difference is they're very small countries, not Italy so much, but the Netherlands, very small, very liberal in the Netherlands, actually. And so it's easier to sort of corral people to, it's like the state of Washington, about that size. So to try to do something here like that here in this country would be much more difficult, because you would have, so many other people weighing in. First point. The second point on that taxation, I think you've got a good point there, which is that, religious organizations, being religious organizations, have certain tax exemptions. But once, whether you're talking about Christian, Islam, Judaism, whatever, they start preaching political, then you start crossing a line to, wait a second, I mean, I'm coming here for a religious message, not a political message. And of course, it's a very subtle line, because one of the reasons that I like to go and hear a religious message in my church is that because they are talking about current events and they can relate to me. And of course we're talking about scripture, but we're also relating scripture to me, my family, today, and world issues. Does that mean that I want my church not to be tax exempt? Well, of course not. But neither do the people that I listen to, preach hate, or political movement, or go vote for this person. The minute that they do that, I'm walking out. That's not what I go there for. So I think that there is an argument to be made, and I think we're going to see that more and more, that, wait a second, okay, you can preach whatever you want and whatever message you want, but you may, if you cross that line to political activism, that's no longer religion.
We'll do a follow-up to that. Churches that bring in political candidates, if they lean one way as opposed to opening it up to both sides, should they lose their tax-exempt status?
Lose, that's a tough word, but it's like the schools at Christmas and Hanukkah time. And Bill and I have been back and forth about this a lot. public schools, you have the baby Jesus, and you have the Hanukkah, and the menorah. You have everything else. You have Islam, whatever. Kwanzaa, fine, as long as everyone is included. What's the problem? To a ridiculous point, John Gibson, one of my colleagues at Fox, wrote a book a couple of years about the death of Christmas. I mean, to the point we can't go into a store and the cashiers are told you can't say Merry Christmas. I mean, as long as I can say Happy Hanukkah back, I mean, what's the problem?
We go back in the audience now to move to another question. Once again, from our friends at Atlantic High School. Go right ahead.
Hello, I'm Samuel. I go to the academy here.
Hey, Sam.
I had a question about the Bill Clinton impeachment thing. From what I heard, it was a case about him committing perjury about Monica Lewinsky.
Paula Jones, right, in the Paula Jones deposition.
Yes. Many prosecutors and judges I've noticed have treated perjury as a very serious crime, whether it's misdemeanor or felony or civil or criminal. And I just wanted to know, do you think personally that we should be treating perjury extremely with great care, be taking, I'm not sure quite the words, we should treat it very seriously as a crime. And even if you're in a big power, should you
Should we put equal weight on perjury charges against people regardless of their position?
Well, of course. But I'll tell you something, perjury is one of the most difficult crimes to convict somebody on as a prosecutor because, and Clinton was a master. What is.
Were you there to see that, by the way?
You have to go look at the history.
Face.
Yeah, you have to look at the history of. I mean, was it perjury? Was it not perjury? It depends on, you know. And you're too young, and I don't want to go into some of the details. But it, you know, the whole definition of was changed. I'm digging myself into a hole here. So, no, I mean, of course, perjury should be charged, whoever you are, from the President of the United States to, it doesn't matter who you are. But it's a very, very subtle and difficult crime to prove.
Former state attorney here once said when the Clinton charges were out there, perjury? What, are you kidding me? We don't even waste time on that.
Oh, I did. I prosecuted some perjury cases, but they're tough because people can always say, well, I didn't mean it quite that way. I mean, I meant it this other way. And, you know, you've got to prove that it was an actual lie. And, you know, people that are masters of words, that's hard to do.
Is it relative what the punishment is if somebody is convicted of perjury? I mean, what kind of a sentence do you get doled out for?
It's not much. I mean, it's been a while. I think it's maybe in the Fed system up to 5 years, but nobody gets that.
Oh, wow. Let's go back in the audience now and a question.
Lisa, I have a question. One of the things, kind of not really segueing off of Jim, but one of the issues that I see coming up a lot in recent times is the difference in treatment of different religions, in that people will go to defense, they will fight, you know, tooth and nail to defend this mosque at Ground Zero.
ACLU, for example.
But
right.
A World War II memorial out in the middle of the desert that nobody sees. The instant in that scene and somebody brings it up, you've got the same groups turning around and attacking Christianity, and it's happening all over the place. Is there more First Amendment right for certain religions? Is there something that we can do on a grassroots level to defend whatever it is that our religion is? And what can we do about it? Do we have to take this double standard for different religions?
Well, of course there shouldn't be a double standard for different religions, but the ACLU and other organizations are incredibly powerful, and they will go after some of the examples that you just brought up. Now, sometimes the ACLU does a marvelous job and really brings to light things that are going wrong. But sometimes, as you're right, that they'll go after one cause, and then something with the Christian bent, for example, it's like, wait a second, where's the ACLU then? Where are you there? And obviously, none of us in this room can control what the ACLU does or decides to take, but there are other organizations that, as long as they're alerted to things and as long as they have some funding, will go after those various causes. And you just have to be alert. You have to be in the community, be watching what's happening. I mean, all politics are local, right? So what's happening here in Florida? What's going on here? Where are the offenses happening here, and what can you do about it here in your community?
An elementary question, I should have asked this. The CEO of one of our partners, which is Kenny TV, said to me, is she liberal or conservative? And I really don't know. And I know you don't like to be pigeonholed, but what are you? What do you consider yourself?
I don't like to be pigeonholed. I grew up the daughter of an FBI agent, traveled all across the country, was an FBI agent, third generation federal prosecutor. I think I'm fairly conservative on criminal justice issues. My dad had a gun in the house when I was growing up, and we were told where it was and not to touch it, but I mean that was just part of growing up. Daughter of a Danish immigrant, fairly liberal, and so I like to take on every issue and just call them as I see them. I mean, and the day that Fox tells me what I have to say is the day I quit and I start cleaning houses, which is an honorable job.
Well, good for you. Since you brought guns into it, are Second Amendment rights under attack in this country or not?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Look at D.C., look at the handgun laws that have been challenged in D.C. and Virginia. Again, I grew up with it. It wasn't a big deal. I knew my dad showed me where the gun was. I think it was just because he didn't want me fumbling around for it. On the other hand, I remember distinctly when I was going into freshman in high school and hearing about a guy that I had danced with in the 8th grade graduation dance. His brother had accidentally shot him to death. So, I don't think I've ever told that story.
Wow.
So, wow, where do you go from there? I mean, I think guns, I don't have them in my house, not because I'm against them, but because I think they could be turned against me. And I think you have to know what you're doing with a gun. But anyway, went off on a tangent there. But thinking about my
now we
my
know
8th
everything
grade
about
dance,
Lis's weaponry.
Yeah, was very sad.
Let's go back in the audience now. Arthur Burns in the front row.
You mentioned Martha Stewart earlier, and I'm one of those people that thinks that being convicted of lying in that situation was just some way for the government to get her. Because how many of us, when the cop pulls you over, when he says, "Do you know why I pulled you over?" How many of us say, "Oh yeah, I ran that stop sign back there"?
I was going.
So do you think that it's going to be fair for Bellagio, the Chicago guy, the Illinois governor? What are your thoughts as to what should happen to him? Blagojevich? Yeah, I never remember.
Blago, right. Yeah, for the first few times when it was like, what's his name again? And then it came Blago. That's easier. Yeah. Blago said, I think just yesterday, that he wants he was just convicted on one count of 23 or 24. That was lying. It's called USC 18-1001, lying on to a federal official during a federal investigation. That's what Martha Stewart was convicted of as well. And I don't know. I think they got him. I mean, come on.
I heard he wanted to run for governor now.
Yeah, now he's got the reality show and he's got books he's writing. I mean, his hairdo, please. I'm enough of him.
Questions from the audience? Just wave to Linnell. She'll come over and you can ask your question. And while we look for someone, and don't forget our students, you got to write this thing up here. Don't ask, don't tell. What a mess. How did they ever walk that one back?
I don't think they do. I mean, what you know, of course, now is that a couple of days ago it was ruled that the don't ask, don't tell policy is unconstitutional. And, I'm looking at both sides of it. The one side says, well, it's not a good thing for homosexuals to be in the military and not be able to disclose. I mean, that's bad for morale. And then the other side, well, wait a second, so if we disclose, then we can't be in the military? I mean, I haven't been in the military. What I'd like to know is from somebody who's actually in the military what kind of impact it has on them. But that's where we are. I mean, it's going to be, obviously it's got to be, go all the way through the system and implemented somehow, but we're now at a point where it's been held that you cannot do that is unconstitutional.
You were the principal deputy chief minority investigative counsel.
Long title.
For the House Judiciary Committee. I don't know, it's like continued on next business card.
It's like the business card. Here are my 3 business cards.
You got to see this. I spoke with a member of the minority who said to me, Mark, if you're looking for the baby Jesus, you're not going to find him in Congress. That there are so many people who have problems, who have background problems.
Oh, absolutely.
You were in the investigative side. I mean, is it true? If you were to do a litmus test on these people.
On everybody.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not, then that's not Democrat, that's not Republican. It's whoever's in power likes to say, well, it's the other guys that are bad, and then, but everybody, I mean, whether it was, there were horrible things that came out about Chairman Hyde, the Republican, awful, horrible, rotten stuff. I hope you kids don't remember any of that. And, then Chuck Schumer, I mean, there were just so many things being back and forth. And politics is just an ugly business. And don't throw, what is it? Don't throw stones at glass houses, because unless you don't have anything in your house, don't throw those stones.
Let's go back up in the audience once again, and a question for Lis Wiehl.
Okay, I'm Mariah from Atlantic High School
Hi,
Law and
Mariah.
Government Academy. And I would like to know, how would you recognize the difference between legal and moral obligations?
The difference between legal and moral obligations. Okay, let me give you an example. We were just talking about the mosque, right? The proposed mosque in New York. Well, legally, they have a First Amendment, freedom of religion right to build that mosque there. Got it. Morally, shouldn't the people that want to build that mosque be thinking about the victims' families from 9/11 and how most of them really, really don't want that mosque there, and how many people are worried that that mosque is going to be a venue for more violence and more demonstrations and more protests and people being hurt. There was a taxi driver stabbed a Muslim a couple weeks ago. I mean, just all of these things kind of amalgamating around this mosque. So from a moral perspective, don't you think they should back off? Though legally, they absolutely have the right to do it. So I think in your life, is it Mariah?
Yes.
You're going to face those issues all the time. You can walk the line, skirt the line, if you will, to be on the legally right side and still be morally impure. So in your life, okay, you can say, well, this is legal, but is it moral? And that's for you to have to ask yourself, because I can't do that for you. The law isn't going to do that for you. Only you can do that.
Before we go back in the audience, I've been waiting for somebody to ask about the Supreme Court, and it hasn't happened yet. And I want to ask, with Elena Kagan now on the bench, how is the profile, how is the bench changed by her presence?
It's not going to change at all.
Really?
Yeah. And I do have a little bit of a bias here. I know I'm fair and balanced, but I've been in Elena Kagan's home. I was a visitor at Harvard, and she was just she was the dean there, and lovely, smart. And she corralled the kittens, or bears, at Harvard Law School. Their egos are like, they could not walk through that. The professors could not walk through those doors without their heads slamming into them. And she was able to corral them. So I do have a little bit of a bias. I think she's terrific. But really what it'll do, she took one liberal seat that is now vacant. She took it. So we're still going to have 5-4 decisions.
Let's go back in the audience now. Your question for Lis Wiehl. Good evening.
Yeah, I was going to ask a question about the Supreme Court, so I'm glad you did anyway. But to follow up on that, though, do you think that it's going to become a more activist panel that it has in the past? Because we've seen, or at least in the news, the perception is that judges are becoming more activists and starting to create law rather than, rule on the constitutionality of law.
Right.
What do you think, or where do you think the Supreme Court will go?
Again, I don't think the Kagan confirmation is really going to make much of a difference, because her taking the Stevens seat, I mean, it's I think she's actually more conservative than Stevens was. So I don't think that's going to make a difference. But you ask a broader question about activist judges versus judges that just interpret the law. By saying just interpret, I don't mean it in a derogatory way. Interpret the law, because that is what they're supposed to do after all. And that's why we have the three branches. The judge is supposed to look at it cool and dispassionately at the law and say this is what the law says, and interpret what our forefathers meant. That being said, yeah, at the lower court level, forget about the Supreme Court for a minute, at the lower court level, I think we are seeing more activist judges on both sides of the aisle. And I don't think that's a good thing. I really think they're politicians, and we know what side they're on, and we know what their views are, and that's terrific if we can vote them in or vote them out. But when it comes to our judges, I want judges, and of course they're people, and of course they bring their experiences, and that's fine. But I'll tell you what, I wrote a law review article some years ago when I was a professor about using the Bible in court opinions and whether or not that was proper. And, you know, it's a very touchy subject, because if we let judges use the Bible as a reference, well, then they can use other things as a reference. And one of the big question marks right now is, can we use international law as a reference? And those things are things that can lead to activist judges. On the other hand, because we're a Christian Judeo society, our principles and laws are based on Christianity and Judaism, then isn't the Bible appropriate? So it's a really, it's a tough line to draw. I guess I just say that primarily I want my judges just to look at the law and tell me what the black letter means.
How come it gets so sticky on issues relating to God in the law when you've got the Supreme Court with the Ten Commandments right there in the Supreme Court?
Remember the Texas judge, though, a couple years ago? You're nodding your head. Remember that? The Texas judge had the Ten Commandments in his office, or not his office, but it was in the hallway, right? Had to bring that down.
But at the Supreme Court themselves, they have it. That's why I don't understand. It's like a double standard almost.
Well, I mean, we are based on those values as a country. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, as long as we don't, there's not in the opinion, well, look at, commandment number whatever, you shall not kill. Okay, the guy killed, and he's, But judges don't do that anyway. And yet, to think that, and Kagan actually said this, and Sotomayor before her, to think that judges don't bring in their personal backgrounds and experiences, I mean, that's just naive. When we have a jury, for example, what I always say to jury in a closing argument is, you didn't just leave your common sense at the door. You didn't leave who you are and your experiences and your judgment at the door, primarily because I knew that they would hate the defendant, but that's another story.
Precious minutes left before we go to the signing. Once again, let's go to the audience for a question for Lis.
I was in the military for 8.5 years, and the way I understood it, you really didn't want to have distractions in the military because they're very focused on their mission. And so that was the way I understood it, that I sort of gave up some of my rights to be politically active or other things like that. I could believe what I wanted to.
Well, let me ask a question for you.
Yeah.
Would it be disruptive? Because this is sort of what I was asking before. Would it be disruptive for you in the military to know that the guy next to you was openly homosexual?
Yes.
It would. Okay.
Yes. And
that would bother you.
Yeah, it would bother me because there are issues that go along with that are going to be a distraction.
Such as?
It's like if I were fighting beside you as a woman, I would want to protect you. Okay?
Good. Thank you.
Because that's the way I was raised.
Right.
Okay? And because I was raised in a Christian Judeo society, I don't believe in homosexuality. And so I think that there would be a distraction there. And if you have a split-second decision that you've got to make, you need to be able to make it right without a lot of side issues. And so to me, homosexuality is a side issue in the military, and therefore you really don't want to get into that.
What about, and I just posit this, I don't know that it would be true. What about people, though, that try to get out of the military and saying, I'm homosexual, knowing that'll keep them out?
Yeah, that's the other side. Cassius Clay or Muhammad Ali did that. Yeah, he was Muslim, and he said that's a peaceful religion, and therefore he wasn't going to go in. And Bill Clinton did the same thing, basically, by
And now we would just
heading
open
out.
up another avenue for people to stay out of the military.
Well, you know what? It's now a volunteer military anyway. So,
That's true, that's
so
true.
it doesn't make any difference.
That's true. Good point.
And it's good that it's volunteer because during Vietnam, you know, we had a lot of people who didn't want to be there. And if you don't want to be there, that's a
shouldn't be
total
there.
distraction.
Yeah.
Good
That is a
point,
total
sir.
distraction.
Even more than your sexuality, I would think.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
Because you could tell that. I mean, whether they say it or not, you could tell whether somebody wants to
Yeah.
be there or not.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
One last thing. This is off topic. Your wedding with Mickey Sherman. I'm looking at the guest list of people who were there. Michael
Uh-oh.
Bolton, Nicolette Sheraton, Court TV founder Steve Brill, legal analyst Ricky Kleiman, our good friend Catherine Cryer, Rita Cosby was there, and Geraldo Rivera.
I love Geraldo.
40 years, I think he's
40
celebrating
years,
now.
2 weeks ago, 40 years.
What's
yeah.
the story with that guy?
He is great. He just had back surgery, so he's kind of recovering from that. But he and Erica, his wife, are just really, we're having dinner with them in October. Nicest guy. Just very self-deprecating. The last time I saw him, he was in the studio. He had brought a couple of his kids there, was showing him around. Just very, very kind, very passionate about what he believes in. I'm sure you've seen him fight with Bill about things. He totally is passionate.
I've seen him. I mean,
But just
that clip, it looked like he was going to have a
yeah,
heart attack.
yeah, they both. I mean, Bill's forehead starts going like this. And I'm like, oh no, God, please, don't have a stroke on me, don't. No, both men believe passionately in what they're talking about, but Geraldo's just, I can't say enough good things about him.
Program note, our next town hall will be actually next Wednesday, and we move things over to the College of Business here on the campus of Embry-Riddle. It'll be in room 118. Sandra Adams is a Republican candidate who is challenging Congresswoman Suzanne Cosmas. We have offered a date to Suzanne Cosmas for her to have her own forum. We are waiting for the announcement of that date, but everyone is invited. It'll be a town hall, slightly different format, where you get to ask Sandra Adams her vision for America. I want to thank our partners at WNDB and also Kenny TV and Seth. Thank you for doing everything here along with Jerry. Richard Weekley, Andrew Strunk, I believe, and Elkin up in the booth, and Linnell Craig, who also helped tonight, along with countless other people who made this possible, and our friends at Thomas Nelson Publishing, who helped set all this up. We thank you so much for being with us. Once again, the author of the book, Hand of Fate, ladies and gentlemen, Lis Wiehl.
Thank you. And thank you for your questions. Thank you for really smart, interesting questions. You gave me something to think about, because I kind of live in a bubble, sometimes going and back and forth into the studio. So it's great to hear this. Thank you. Thanks, Mark, for inviting me.
Thank you. And our partners at the bookstore here on campus of Embry-Riddle will be selling copies of the book. Lis will be signing copies for the next few minutes. Thank you. And for all of you, drive carefully on the way home. Thanks for coming. You're wonderful. Thank you.
Okay.
Hey, before you move on, would you sign mine? Of course. It's MARC. Good question, sir. Yeah. Hey, Doctor. Thank you, man.